Morning, everyone. It feels like it's been a while since I've been here, and it's good to see faces that are so familiar in the pews. Today, we're going to talk about something rigid, something hard. Today, we're going to talk about the law. When I think about the law, the first thing that comes to mind is a classic song by The Clash. I fought the law, but the law won. All jokes aside, this topic is one that we may quickly run into tension with here inside our church. We are the church of tradition, of the canons, of law. Those things are intrinsic to who we are as Orthodox Christians. But they are not our telos, our end. The church is our path to salvation in Christ. Now, in our church, you will have some people who are ready to throw away every rule and guidance that the church has as inapplicable to them and their lives or our times. The law, they say, is simply a relic of a time before the freedom of our current age. And inside our church, you will have just as many people who treat every rule and every law inside all of their nuances as if they were the ultimate purpose inside life. We have to be quite blunt here. According to the Orthodox Church, neither side is right. Especially in this day and age of polarization, we crave to fall into one of those sides. But our church is not one of polemics. She is not a tool to use against those people who disagree with us. She guides us towards that middle road, the path of moderation. Listen to these two verses. First, for I tell you assuredly, that till heaven and earth pass away, not one iota shall pass from the law. And then, the letter kills, that's the letter of the law, but the Spirit gives life. One seems to tell us that the law matters, and the other that it is secondary. Both of these verses are true, but how can that be? So we're going to read another verse in the Bible that will help us examine this a little bit more in depth. St. Paul writes to the Romans, "For Christ is the end of the law, that everyone who has faith may be justified." You might think, oh, aha, Christ is the end of the law. In English, that seems pretty cut and dry. Christ ended the law. But fortunately for us, we have the ability to read the epistle in the original Greek. And if we do, we see the word for end used is telos. Telos is not a synonym for abrogation. In other words, the law is not canceled. Telos is used to define the end in the sense of an ultimate purpose. In fact, in Revelation, Christ uses this to define himself. Ego to alpha ke to omega, o protos ke o esarchos, iarchi ke to telos. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. With this reading, the verse from Romans takes on an entirely new light. When we say, for Christ is the end of the law, we see it now as an instruction that the law is not an end in and of itself, but it leads us to Christ. That is the middle ground that our church is holding on to. So often, if we take this law as its own telos, we fall into the traps of the Pharisees who Christ admonished so strongly. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. You ought to have done those without neglecting the others." See Christ calling us towards that middle ground. Remember the law, but remember that it is leading us towards something. Having said that, let's examine another aspect of the law. The law as a litmus test for our salvation. It's very simple. We all fail the test that the law lays before us. Each and every one of us. From the greatest sinner here inside this building today to the kindest and sweetest person that you can see if you look around you. The fathers of the church, they knew this. Every liturgy, just a couple seconds ago, You hear Father Nick reciting the words of King David during the censing of the cherubic hymn. And the priest or the bishop is praying these words not just for each of us, but also for himself personally. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity. Our liturgy is full of this kind of supplication because the fathers of the church knew that we all fall short of the law. Have mercy on us, O God, because it is only through your mercy that we have hope. And in Christ and his mercy, the law takes its proper place, not as a litmus test, but rather as a way for us to come closer to God. It is a guide for us to follow. Remember, the law's telos was and is Christ. Christ tells us elsewhere, if you love me, keep my commandments. Not out of compunction, but because those who abide in love and thereby in God live their lives according to the commandments of Christ. It can be helpful to think of the law in a way similar to natural laws. And I want to share a hiking story that illustrates this for you. This summer in Colorado, we were finishing a 10-mile hike and were racing against the rain for this last mile. By the time we made it back to the campsite, the rain had started. And by the time we got our tents zipped up, it was now hailing. The wind was strong enough that water was bouncing off the ground, coming up underneath the rain, flying, spraying against the inside walls of our tent. The tents were lit by the lightning, and the thunder was not just near as it can be here in Florida, but it was bouncing between the different mountain peaks that were all around us. We're huddled there, wondering if this storm is going to get better or worse. Hail is hammering the tents. And we started to sing a song that we'd made up on a cold hike last year. I'm going to sing it briefly for you, but let me preface this by saying that you might want to cover your ears. It was made off-key to kind of introduce levity to situations up there in the mountains that need it. Hypothermia is not your friend. If you get it, you might be dead. Now, the reason I wanted to share that with you here today is that as dad joke level of funny, if you can call it, it's describing something that does not care if we are laughing. There is a law behind why the cold can kill you. Sir Isaac Newton worked it out 300 years ago, and it's called the law of cooling. It says the rate at which something, or in this case, someone, loses heat is proportional to the difference between our own temperature and the temperature of what's around us. The bigger the gap, the more exacerbating factors such as wind or wetness that exist, the faster that this heat is going to pour out of you. None of those things are negotiable. It doesn't matter if you're 8 years old singing at the top of your lungs inside a tent, or if you're a grown-up adult out facing the elements. The law will affect you exactly the same either way. Nobody voted on that law. No council wrote it. You cannot charm it or sing it or talk your way around it. It was true before Newton ever picked up this pen to examine it, and it will be true long after each of us here in this building is gone. That's what it means for something to be a constant. It isn't. Now, we're going to come back towards the law inside the church. This isn't something that's given to us from the outside to restrict us. It's reality itself described, the shape that the world actually has, whether we like that shape or not. And that's what the church means when she's speaking about the law. It's not an arbitrary fence that God built because he enjoys these rules. It's the shape of the world that he made. It's the shape that we take because we are made inside his image. And just as there's real physical difference between staying warm inside a tent and stepping out into that rain and wind unprotected, there is a real difference between a life ordered towards God and a life that has stepped out of that shelter. The commandments, they don't make that difference. They describe it for those of us who might otherwise wander into the cold without knowing what we're going and walking into. So what does it look like living in that shelter? Christ shows us himself. We read in the gospel, his disciples are hungry, walking through a field on the Sabbath of grain with ripe grain. What do? They take some, they pick it, they eat it. The Pharisees pounce. This is unlawful. How could you allow this on the Sabbath? This is a clear violation. And Christ doesn't go and tell them, the law doesn't matter. Come on, guys, get with the times. He reaches back to the scriptures instead. He reminds them of David, starving, fleeing for his life, walking into the house of God and eating the bread reserved only for the priests. Because at that moment, a hungry man had become the weightier matter of the law, and the law itself had always known that. Another example from the Sabbath. Standing in front of the very people who were watching and waiting for him to make a mistake, Christ reaches out his hand and he heals a man's withered hand. He's not teaching us that the law doesn't matter. He is showing us what the law was for all along: our healing, mercy, love, peace. And that's what we need to take with us this morning. Living the law means moving towards life. Transgressing means choosing something that costs our lives, even in small, quiet ways. So let's make that a little concrete. How many of us have sat across the table from our family, our spouse, our children, our parents, and have yet still been absent? When we sit for a meal, what is so often sitting right next to us? Okay? Our phone, right beside us, often face up next to the plate. Oh wait, the Jaguars are going to win every game this season? So someone can be sitting there, telling us about their day, pouring their heart to us, and we're sitting there, yeah, totally. And we can't even repeat back one word to the person who was opening themselves up to us because some notification flashed across our screen. What a dystopia we willingly place ourselves in. Now, you're not going to find a commandment in the scriptures that says, "Thou shalt not check thy phone at dinner." No canon addresses it. But this is exactly the trap that we already named a few minutes ago. The trap of the Pharisees, tithing mint and dill and cumin down to the leaf while missing what actually carries weight. The weightier matters were never and are certainly not about which specific list of rules we can point to and say, "See, I kept all of those." They are about justice, mercy, faith, about attending to God and to each and every human being in front of us. This law may not be written on a tablet or an iPad for that matter, but it doesn't need to be. Every time that we choose to scroll over the face across the table, we are choosing something smaller over someone whom we claim to love. We don't need a rule book to spell that out, because this law was never meant to be a ceiling of a few hundred prohibitions that we can check off and call ourselves finished or good. Instead, the law is meant to mold our heart so that it no longer needs to be told to look up. What an impossibly high bar. If this is what the law requires, who among us can actually meet that bar? Today's epistle answers it directly. St. Paul tells the Galatians that before Christ, we were kept under the law as a custodian, but now in Christ, we are no longer slaves, we are sons. I don't think there's a better picture of what that calling looks like than the parable of the prodigal son. Remember, the son has taken everything, wasted everything, and is walking home to the Father to explain that he no longer deserves to be called a son. And Luke tells us the Father sees him while he is still a long way off, which means that the Father was looking for him and had been looking for him for a long time. He doesn't sit there and wait at the door to teach him a lesson of humility, but he runs to him. He hikes up his robes and runs down the road to reach his son before his son even confesses. This is not the story either of a son who cleaned himself up and was living according to the iotas of the law before he returns to receive justified forgiveness. In the parable, the son returns while he still smells of pigs. All he had was his humility. That is our path. We fall, and by God's mercy, we get up. We fall again, and then we get up again. That is what metanoia is all about. Every single time we fall, the Father is waiting for us to climb back up again. I want to end with today's gospel. The disciples are brought a task that seems as impossible as we are tasked with. 5,000 people to be fed, not including the women and children, remember, with 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's impossible. The disciples want to send away the crowd to tell them, go to the villages, buy your own food. That's the custodian's answer. Reasonable, measured, logical. Nobody's wrong for suggesting it. But Christ says these words instead, bring them here to me. And what was insufficient in the disciples' hands becomes more than enough in Christ. 12 baskets are left over. That is the difference St. Paul is explaining to the Galatians, the difference between living under the law and living as a child of God. A servant calculates out what he or she is owed. A child brings their father all that he or she has, no matter how little it may be, and watches to see what happens next. Archbishop Anastasios used to constantly remind us of something. When we were facing these difficulties in Albania that seemed insurmountable, he would name these, that this situation would need a miracle to get through. But then, he'd say in the same breath, but we believe in a God of miracles. My brothers and sisters in Christ, the miracle that we hear today is that the law was never the destination. It is the path. And the path that leads home to a Father who runs to meet us and takes the little that we bring him and makes it enough. So this week, when a fast, a prayer, a small discipline feels like nothing more than mint and dill, trust that it is quietly building within us the strength that we need to forgive, to love the person in front of us when it actually is going to cost something, to let us bring him what we can and watch what he does with it.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for downloading this message. I hope that in some small way this sermon can inspire you, motivate you, and guide you in your walk of faith. I'm a firm believer, friends, in what I like to call practical Christianity. Basically trying my best to give you some steps and some tips that you can follow to apply this sermon in your everyday walk of faith. And so if you have found this sermon beneficial, do me a favor. Not only do I want you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you get access to all of our sermons, but I also want you to share them with your family and your friends. Let's go out and make a difference in this world, and hopefully this sermon can be one way that we do just that. I also want you to stay in touch with us all throughout the week on our social media platforms. Friends, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook and Twitter, all under the headings of The Lows. And this past year, Roxanne and I started sending out these daily inspirational messages. And if you would like to receive those messages, go to our website at thelows.com/subscribe. And all you have to do is simply put up your email address, and every day at 7 a.m., you'll receive one of our daily words of encouragement. And finally, friends, if I can ever be of assistance to you, do me a favor. You can stay in touch with me by going and emailing me at fathernicholas@ thelows.com. That's Father Nicholas at thelows.com. Once again, everyone, thanks so much for downloading this message. God bless you and stay strong in your walk of faith.